Far from the Madding Crowd, yeah. That was my mum's favourite movie of mine. She always thought I looked better in Far from the Madding Crowd than I looked in anything else. But I very nearly didn't get it because Schlesinger was into blondes and he didn't fancy me for it at all. But the producer, Joe Yanni, he liked me. And I'd worked with him with Joe Losey on Modesty Blaze. So he kind of hoisted me in over Schlesinger's head, really, which didn't make for a good relationship between Schlesinger and me, but, you know, we were both pros. Well, I guess the wonderful thing about Madding Crowd is it's got sort of, the heroine is Bathsheba. So the lead really is this wonderful woman. And the three men are kind of different archetypes. And Troy is kind of the bad boy, you know. He's the guy that chicks fall for initially, and then they get to learn about him, and then they realize he's not that great. So he's a attractive bad boy, really.
Now don't be a doodle, Fanny. I'll see you soon. That's enough of that.
I guess the biggest challenge was that Schlesinger insisted that I do all the sword stuff with my right hand, and I was really a real lefty. But Schlesinger said, no, before 1860 all cavalrymen had to be right-handed. So I had to learn to wield this Victorian sabre, basically with both hands. And that was it was just tremendous works, because I had to learn how to really ride a horse, and I had this extra problem of learning how to be really proficient with this heavy sabre. So yeah, that was the thing I remember as being really difficult, frankly. Well, what was really interesting was that I can see now that neither Schlesinger nor the editor had much idea about what to do with the sword sequence, because they barely covered it. But Nick Roeg, who was a really great filmmaker, realized that it was the introduction of Troy, and the sword sequence, you know, had to be really wonderful to make her falling in love with him so quickly believable. So he came to me and he said, look, they haven't got enough footage on the sword exercise, so why don't you and I do something? So whenever the light's really beautiful, I'll give you the wink and we'll go off and shoot some extra stuff. And that was how the sword sequence became so wonderful, because whenever there was a wonderful sunset, Nick would say, get your sword. And we'd go off and we shot everything. We shot with both hands, we shot throwing this. We did everything we could think of. So that when it came, and Nick also knew that when it came to putting the film together, you know, although the editor and the director hadn't shot it, that it would be irresistible to them. And that was really the first scene in the movie that was really pacey. Other than that, the editing and the shooting is kind of ponderous, but at least the sword sequence is fast and sexy, which was like, I have to give credit to Nick Roeg, because it was his idea. Well, kissing Julie was quite groovy as well, you know. The thing about Julie, even though Julie, you know, is very ambivalent about being an actress, and ambivalent about, you know, she doesn't think she's particularly beautiful. She's very modest. But the truth is that she has a kind of what I think of as a beingness as a person. There's a wonderful kind of presence of reality and somebody really being in their body. And although, you know, showbiz is full of beautiful women, I've rarely come across one that has that kind of wonderful quality of being that Julie has. And it's still there today. I mean, we try to see each other once or twice a year, you know, and it's just always fun to see her, and always very ennobling to be in her presence, even though she'd be shocked to hear that, especially from me. Well, as a boy, I belonged to the Cubs, and I'd gone camping in, you know, just below Corfe Castle. So that was almost like my first memory of deep countryside, you know, so I was very happy to go back there. And I've always felt a very special place in my heart for Dorset, because I think it's so beautiful, it's so English. And at the time, I don't know how it is now, but at the time it was virtually unchanged, you know. So I was there as like a 4-year-old, and then I went back as a kind of 25-year-old, and it was how I remembered it. So yeah, I've got only really good things to say about Dorset. Like, how I know that I was right to become a movie actor was that, you know, in my first film, which was a black and white film called Billy Budd, and it was lit by the guy who lit The Third Man, you know, was the greatest black and white cameraman. And then I went to Hollywood to do The Collector, which was my first color movie, and I was shot by arguably the greatest DP in America, was called Bob Surtees. And they made me look better on the screen than I looked in real life. So when I saw that, I thought, I don't actually look that good, but I look very good on film. So when I came to work with Nick Roeg, he just made me look better than everybody. So I always thought that Nick Roeg was a real great film person. And to be frank, I always imagined that when he became a director, I would work with him. But he went rock and roll, you know what I mean? He cast Mick Jagger, he cast David Bowie, 2 roles where I would have been fantastic.
Bathsheba, I come here for you. I've come to take you home. Come, madam. Do you hear me?
I'd had a rough time with Schlesinger. He wasn't like the easiest man to get along with. And I didn't really have time to flatter him or be particularly nice with him. I had my work cut out, you know, playing the part. So it was interesting, because he was the first director I worked with that actually didn't like me very much. So it was a new experience for me. I was doing the best I could in spite of him. So when I saw the movie, I was really pleasantly surprised, you know, because I thought that I was up against the very best people, you know. I mean, Alan Bates and Peter Finch, great actors. And as a matter of fact, everybody in the movie, it was like the cream of British actors. I mean, the tiniest part was played by like real geniuses, you know. So I was really relieved that I held my own. I can't imagine what they're going to do, really. I mean, I would find it very harrowing, you know, to kind of to be featuring in a remake of a great classic, you know. I can't imagine what they're going to do. I mean, and I think unless they've come up with a really new approach, they're onto a good hiding for nothing, because you can't really I can't see how you could improve on the original one. You know, it was such a kind of, it was wonderful on all levels. You know, it was a wonderful screenplay. I mean, it ain't easy to adapt Hardy, you know, and Freddie Raphael did an amazing job adapting it, and shot by Nick Roeg and played by all those wonderful actors. So yeah, I mean, I hope they do it, and I'd be fascinated to see it, but I back our one. I think when something works, it works, you know. I think Lawrence of Arabia worked. Far from the Madding Crowd worked. And when films are at their best, the best behind the camera comes through to the audience. It kind of brings out the best in the audience. The audience are thinking, I can understand that. I can feel that. I feel what they're feeling. And I think that's really that's the role of the creative filmmaker, you know, to bring out the best in his actors so that it will bring out the best in the individuals in the audience. And that's a classic, you know, and if people still love Madding Crowd, that's what it does, you know. They can remember when they saw it, and they can remember how they felt when they came out the cinema. It was the first film I did where, you know, the director didn't really love me and wasn't really completely behind me. So although initially it was rather, I felt rather de-energized, you know, when I realized that he really didn't want me and he really didn't see the part as Terrence, you know, or anything that Terrence could do. But in the long term, it worked out really well because it gave me confidence that I could work with a director that didn't necessarily think that I was particularly good. It gave me the confidence to do that. Of course, I've worked with lots of directors since who haven't thought I was particularly good, so Sergeant Troy stood me in good stead.
Look, you're making it worse on purpose. Please go and leave me here.
Impossible, I'm afraid. If I go, I shall drag you with me. And if I leave you here, well, I'm absolutely bound to stay and keep you company.
Who are you?
Sergeant Troy.
Well, I got involved with My Father Madding Crowd basically because we had made a movie called Darling, John Schlesinger and Joe Yanni and I, which was a very long and laborious activity, and was quite enough of that for quite a while, I thought, actually. And then Darling was a great hit. Julie Christie won the Oscar, and so did I, and so did the lady who did the costumes, which took her, I think, not as long as it might have, because she was brought in at the last moment because somebody else had dressed Julie to look too much like a boy, to John's pleasure, but not to the rest of the companies. So the question then was, what are you going to do now? And the implied answer had to be that it should not be something which should take us another 2 years or 3 years to develop, talk about, change, rechange, and all the rest of it. So what have you got to do now? And somebody, and as a matter of fact, I know who it was an ex-MP called Woodrow Wyatt, whom probably nobody's heard of now, but quite a famous, strutty little man in his day. And he said you should do Far from the Madding Crowd because Julie would be perfect as Bathsheba Everdeen. So Joe Yanni read the book, and so did I, and what do you think, what do you think? Because if we do something which is based on a book, we know what it's going to be, we can raise the money right away and get ready to go. I'd read a certain amount of Hardy before I read Far from the Madding Crowd, as it's polite to say, again. I didn't remember it all that well. I'd read Tess of the D'Urbervilles, which has a wonderful cinematic scene in which a girl is carrying honey home from the market on her head in an earthenware jar, and the person behind her sees that it's leaking out of the vase into her hair. So Hardy had two registers. One was very cinematic, very visual, and therefore he gave us lots of images as we went along in the movie. On the other side, he was rather verbosely Latinate in his prose, but luckily in a screenplay, the prose doesn't matter. What matters is the dialogue. The dialogue was fairly good, but it was a bit sort of mock Shakespearean when it came to the yokels. So one had to be careful to compress and refine that.
Well, what is your opinion?
That it's unworthy. I'm sorry if that sounds like a reprimand.
Oh, no, not at all. As far as I'm concerned, a reprimand from you is the same as a compliment from anyone of real judgment.
I don't think that one needed to do a lot of research in order to make Far from the Madding Crowd or to write it, but I did have a very, very good helper called Claire Tomalin, who later became a biographer, and I think she actually wrote a biography of Hardy quite recently. Anyway, Claire checked out all the songs, the local folk songs of the period, which was extremely useful, and I think we've used several of them in the movie.
As I was a-walking one morning in May, I spied a young couple a-making of hay. Oh, one was a fair maid and her beauty shone clear, and the other was a soldier, a bold grenadier.
I don't greatly believe in research. What I believe is checking. In other words, it's better to write a piece about ancient Rome and then make sure that Cicero really was alive at that time than it is to check out when Cicero was alive and then write the film, because by the time you've researched it, you're bored to tears. G.H. Lawrence said that Gabriel Oak, who was the man, the shepherd that eventually Julie or Bathsheba ends up with, he said that Gabriel was like a patient dog who waits his time. Not a particularly kind version of Gabriel, actually, who was actually quite an active dog if he was a dog. Troy, naturally enough, D.H. Lawrence thought that Troy was a kind of walking phallic image, which in a way he was. And with Terry, you could well believe that. And then we had the sort of sad figure of Boldwood. Strange thing about the D.H. Lawrence, which I read with some care, as you can tell, after all these years I can remember it pretty well. He said the strange thing about Boldwood is he's the only character in the book who doesn't have a first name. Now, what's interesting about that is that he does have a first name, and it is in the book, and it's William. So D.H. Lawrence thought of Boldwood as this kind of Mr. Boldwood figure. And in a way, that's exactly how I thought of him, because that's how he's written. But of course, when Peter Finch came in to play him, as actors do, he brought something quite extraordinary, vulnerable, and touching into this rather priggish, sorry figure.
I feel almost too much to think. But I've come to talk to you without preface. My life has not been my own since I beheld you clearly. Miss Everdeen, I've come to make you my offer of marriage. Beyond everything I ever believed, I want you as my wife.
Julie was sort of very modern, but she had a great face for the camera. She didn't particularly like having it. She didn't want to be a movie star. She didn't particularly want to be in David Lean's Dr. Zhivago, and she didn't much want to do this, but she was sort of resigned to success, which is a sad condition, by the way. It doesn't happen that often or last that long. You might as well enjoy it when it comes, frankly. Anyway, she was resigned to doing this piece, but it's a big mistake to imagine that there are modern faces and antique faces. There's often modern makeup and antique makeup, or not a makeup. So Julie had a perfectly good face for Bathsheba Everdeen, who was a kind of ahead of her time lady. And I think she made a pretty damn good job of it. I don't think ever with a movie, when you watch it again, every single scene is as you would wish. Rarely, actually. But enough of them are still pretty good, and I thought she did a really, really good job, actually.
Ah, Miss Everdeen. Little did I think it was you. The Queen of the Corn Market herself I was speaking to the other night. I'm sorry if I offended you, but it does seem a bit hard.
What seems hard?
That ill luck should follow a man for honestly telling a woman she's beautiful.
It's not your honesty I take exception to. It's your impudence.
Miss Everdeen. You do forgive me, don't you?
I do not.
How can you blame me for your looks? A woman like you does more damage than she can conceivably imagine.
Please go away. I'd rather you didn't talk to me again.
I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since I first met you.
Oh.
Honestly. I loved you then, at once. And I do now.
It's not possible. There's no such sudden feeling in people.
What was it like working with John Schlesinger? John was enormous fun. I mean, of all the people that one wishes now would be walking up the drive or ringing the bell or whatever it is, we generally say, of course, John was the greatest fun. He was. To put it very simply, Schlesinger was his very best when he needed you most, which was always at the beginning of a project. He was great fun to work with. We did lots of laughing when we were with Joe Yanni doing Darling. We used to laugh with Joe, we used to laugh against Joe, and Joe, God knows, used to get angry or whatever it was. Wonderful producer, by the way. I mean, we haven't mentioned Joe Yanni, but Joe Yanni is a really important figure in John Schlesinger's life and in mine, and well worth attention, though we won't necessarily get into that. John and Joe had made 2 films which were based in Bradford in the north of England, and they were quite tired of being in a sooty northern town, and they wanted to make a film about the Dolce Vita of London. That's really what Joe, who knew all those people in Italy because he was Italian, had in mind. So we did that after a very long pregnancy. And it was a great success. And success is a greater bond than love, admiration, or anything else. If it is, not always, but on the whole it is. So the next thing was, what are we going to do now? By that time, John and I had had many rows, but they were rows within the limits of, but of course this is only a row. Quite an important relationship in relationships. And we laughed a lot together. And he was sort of very naughty, and when roused I could be fairly amusing, and that all worked fine. Father Man in Crowd was a rather more business-like thing for the reasons that I've said. I mean, when I finished the script, which didn't take all that long, never tell them how long it takes to write a script. Bill Goldman said to me, do you always ask for 14 weeks? So I said, well, I usually, actually, I don't really need 14 weeks. I didn't say that. What I said was, how long do you ask for? Because he said, you can write a book while they think you're still working on the script, and that's quite true. That's the way my life has been. So anyway, Father the Man in Crowd came along, and we talked for a bit, but not long about it, because there it was on the page, Thomas Hardy, will you do it? So I did what a good charcutier does. You cut the beast up and make nice sausages and various bits and pieces out of it, and et voila. I delivered the script to Joe Yanni and waited, and you didn't used to wait as long in the old days as you do now, because people like to persecute creative people in order to enhance the reputation of the executives. That's now. In those days, it wasn't quite like that. So after a couple of weeks, the phone rang, and I said, hello, and he said, who is that? Which is the thing that Joe did. And I said, well, who did you call? So he said, Fred. So I said, yes, I've read the script. Yes. And something worries me very much. Oh? What's that, Joe? Well, he said, page 127. I'm not sure we need the scene where she goes in the barn. So I said, is that the only thing that is worrying you? Yes, on the whole, yes. That is his way of saying, it's a great script, thank you very much. It happens quite a lot in the movies, but not always. Working with John was just fine. I didn't go a lot to the set. John, unlike Stanley Donen, but very like Stanley Kubrick, did not like having writers on the set, unless they needed a line, because funnily enough, though they always hate writers, they can't do without them. See Under the Jews and various things like that, if you want to do that. So I didn't go down. I did go down a bit. And John did wonderfully well on Father the Man in Crowd in terms of the movement. Of course, he had help, but that's okay. Everybody has help, except writers. But I thought he did a wonderful job. It wasn't exactly congenial to him to be dealing with Dorset peasants of the 19th century, but you wouldn't have guessed it. Terrific performance by John. It's increasingly difficult to find locations to make period pieces, and in fact nowadays people are very, very reluctant to make them. In the 1960s, English television had used a lot of rural settings, so it wasn't very surprising to go out into the countryside and find places which were pretty well unspoiled. I don't honestly know, shame upon me, who the location manager was, but he or she did a very good job because they found very, very good sets. I don't know how much trouble John had with television aerials and all the rest of it, but rural Dorset was still pretty damn rural in the 60s, as a matter of fact. And I think that it cohered with Hardy's Wessex, naturally enough, because it was Hardy's Wessex, pretty damn well. The difference between television and film is difficult to define, but I think fairly clear. When I had done quite a lot of movies in the 60s and early 70s, the movie business collapsed. It collapses constantly and is resurrected like the phoenix, or not. Depends how well it flies afterwards. But anyway, I got fed up with doing screenplays which didn't get made. It's the fate of every screenwriter, and the bad side is that they don't get made, and the good side is that in those days, if you had an Oscar and all that stuff, you got very well paid for what they junked, which wasn't the worst thing that ever happened to a writer, especially if he wanted to use that money to buy time to write books, which I always did. But I did get fed up with not being performed, because the fun of being a writer is to be with the actors, particularly if it's an original, because if it's an original, it's your piece. So I had the idea of doing a television series about people at Cambridge and all of that, because there it was. That's sort of what I think of as a lifeboat film. Hitchcock made a movie called Lifeboat, which was all about people in lifeboats. Some fell out, some went mad, some died, and some survived. Mutatis mutandis, that was what I wanted to do for my generation at Cambridge. And the BBC in those days had a guy who could say yes or no. And since some friends of mine knew him very well and he liked to have a glass of champagne, he said, come and drink some champagne, let's do it. So we did. So I had the opportunity to write dialogue in longer scenes. This is what it comes through, the difference. Television in those days had great trundling cameras which were quite difficult to move. They didn't do much filming and it was expensive. So the trick was, in order to coincide with what was economical, let's have lots of scenes with plenty of dialogue and action between players who don't move a lot. That appealed to me a lot because I like writing dialogue. It's the way I tell stories is through dialogue. Even in novels I use, on the whole, a great deal of dialogue. In film in those days, Joe Yanni, who was an sort of absolutely archetypal, very good Italian film producer, said, Fred, no scene should be longer than six lines. 3 lines each to 2 people. Now we cut to something else. In television, on the contrary, you could have 16 lines between 2 people, as long as they held. And that was the trick. It's changed somewhat because they started using cameras, they started filming, and so the two things converge to some extent. Now, unfortunately, in my view, film has been influenced to the degree which it has by television, so that we get an awful lot of actors walking and talking, as if that was interesting. The trouble with walking and talking is that the camera can't follow them, and certainly can't frame. And the fun of film really is looking at somebody holding, giving them a chance to do nothing in a way which tells you everything. That doesn't happen much in film, as it doesn't happen much in television. They have converged, and I think probably they've done each other great harm. I find most modern movies very disappointing because they're either in a terrific hurry or they dawdle a lot. They don't seem to me to hit the pace correctly, mainly because they've given up the notation which I thought made film, to put it in a very old-fashioned way, scan. By scan, I mean that if I have a long scene and then a long scene, I better damn well not have another long scene. I better have 2 short ones. Then I could have a long one and a short one. In other words, I like a variation of speed and tempo. Otherwise, I get bored or irritated. This has nothing whatever to do with whether or not this new version will be good. I hope and suspect that he will find other things in the piece apart from, what is already obviously there. I think it's still admired because Julie is a great beauty. She's not a happy actress. She never was a happy actress. I don't even know whether she was a happy person. I hardly knew her, to tell you the truth. I remember that she bit her nails and had shorter legs than I imagined, but that's a personal matter. She was very beautiful, and the camera loved her. That helps. Terry's great. I think that Finch gave a wonderful performance. Bates was terrific. I mean, unsurprisingly, people remember the performances and the beauty of the thing. I mean, why wouldn't they?
Gabriel, good morning.
Well, miss.
I've been checking the records. We've never had so many lambs come to maturity as this year. Not ever.
Well, we've been lucky, miss.
I've been lucky.
I liked Far From the Man in Crowd when I saw it a lot. I was relieved. I have to tell you that the general feeling, I hope it's true of all of us in the biz, is that the feeling of relief is greater than the feeling of triumph, and we'll do fine. The only thing where I disagreed with John, and I remember doing so, and I think I was right, much it matters, was in the very, very last shot. In the very last shot, Gabriel Oak and Bathsheba Everdeen are sitting by their fireside doing exactly what Gabriel Oak says to her very early on about marriage. Whenever I look up, there will you be, and whenever you look up, there will I be, which is sweet. And believe me, quite possible, because I've been married to the same woman for 60 years, and we do a lot of looking up, and there we all are. John, having sort of made that point, then pans off to a little kind of a clock with a glass dome over it, in which a little red uniformed figure, just like Sergeant Troy, is doing his stuff. And he goes like that, he closes in on it. And I said to him, you really should not finish this film, a film like this, with a shot like that. And he said, well, I'm going to. And he did, and he was wrong. First of all, to put it quite candidly, John needed to sabotage the marriage. I don't have a need to sabotage marriage. I've written about marriage with some candor in all sorts of ways, because that's the fun of being a writer. You can play those games. But actually, she was right to end up with Gabriel Oak. It may be that in the erotic sense, Sergeant Troy was a hotter number, but that wasn't really what the piece was saying. And if it was, let the piece say it. Don't poke it in my face at the very end. I would have preferred to come out for the last shot rather than to go in, but who am I? I mean, the director directs, the writer writes, and bitches. That's the way it goes.
Getting involved with the project in those days was very different from today, first of all. Especially when I was lucky I got into the union, and the union was quite powerful, you know, in terms of crewing. And I really followed a completely ordinary pattern of employment at that time. I mean, sort of photographic apprenticeship, and I'd gone through that. And John Schlesinger directed it, and it was quite exciting for me because we taught each other things. He was with the theatre and the artists, the actors, and I was for the storyline and the appearance of it, and especially it has it was before a hell of a lot of lamps, especially the location. It was so much on location. It became a film of the seasons as well. We started in springtime, went through the summer. It sounds crazy. Then autumn and then winter. That's what, you know. And it was a crew that was much larger than would be necessary now. You know, they had the camera crew were made up of 6 or 7 people. And then the editing room and the editors. And with that, because it was on one farm, on one area, we moved everything. It wasn't worth going back to London. So we became a little colony of country people. And actually people did change, and the pace of things changed. What would be now, come on, get on with it. I remember we got odd notes from producers and financiers and people. That it was a curious time. But looking back, it was curious. It wasn't curious then. It was a rather important, marvelous thing that Julie Christie and Alan Bates and Terrence Stamp is good, but Peter Finch is no longer with it. Movie-making had a different pace to it, and trying to put what John wanted to do was to keep it in sequence, and not get all the sunshine shots to just show that he wanted to make it as though a season changing. That was the beginning of I guess a complete different way of approaching certainly colour film, because it was much, it went moving on from the giant Technicolor cameras and things, but it still had the mentality of that. When in an era when something's given up or lived through, you can never just not overlap it.
The places are Lulworth Cove and Swanage and Litchett Minster. They are Lyme Regis and Holywell and Maiden Newton. This is Dorset County in southwest England, a place of sudden mists and shifting moods. The heathlands are beautiful and strange, sometimes harsh, sometimes tender, but always strongly alive. Above all things, Dorset is a place of passions. Dorset has its eloquent voice, the voice of Thomas Hardy. He lived here and he wrote here, and he outraged people with his bold, robust stories about Dorset. Hardy's most famous, most successful novel is the one that best paints the passion of Dorset. It is called Far from the Madding Crowd. Academy Award winner Julie Christie has come to Hardy country to learn its moods, to feel its drama, and to star a Metro-Goldwyn-Mayer's screen version of Far from the Madding Crowd.
Dorset is just the most beautiful countryside I think I've ever seen. Like a vast landscape garden. Absolutely exquisite, lovely.
In the bright morning fields of Dorset, touched by their strong spell, Julie Christie becomes Bathsheba, the proud, passionate heroine of Far from the Madding Crowd. The story of Bathsheba and her loves is being filmed at the very places Hardy wrote about, authentic backgrounds unchanged by time. This is the great house at Bloxworth, where Bathsheba is the mistress of the manor. John Schlesinger is directing Far from the Madding Crowd. There is quick communication between the two.
I understand how he works, I think, and what he wants from me, and we've got a sort of give and take technique with perhaps very few words.
All for to hear the small birds sing, and the lambs to skip and play.
This harvest celebration reflects the earthy joy of Bathsheba's life before she becomes entangled with men and the terrible forces of nature. Alan Bates is Gabriel Oak, the bailiff on Bathsheba's estate. He wants her for his wife.
And when the wedding's done, we'll have it put in the papers.
Oh, I should love that.
And the baby's in the list of births.
I'm sorry, but it's no use.
Why?
Because I don't love you.
Peter Finch portrays the dignified Mr. Boldwood, who is shattered by his love for Bathsheba.
Beyond everything, everything I ever believed, I want you as my wife.
Mr. Boldwood, I respect you greatly. But I don't know what would feel, what would justify me in accepting your offer.
Dorset's moods are many. Each setting breathes its own kind of life into far from the madding crowd. Misty Shaftesbury, with its sense of something impending, is one of 30 locations covered in half a year of shooting. And in Shaftesbury, Terrence Stamp begins his portrayal of Sergeant Troy. Handsome, romantic, ruthless. Down the cobbled sweep of Shaftesbury's Gold Hill, down towards the heathland, Sergeant Troy rides to a fateful first meeting with Bathsheba. Julie won an Academy Award for her performance in Darling. That film was also directed by Schlesinger. He feels that Julie is emotionally closer to Bathsheba than she was to the Diana of Darling. Her sense of kinship with the role is tellingly documented in love scenes like this. The medieval village of Saint-Abbas has come upon quiet times. Its hush of abandoned beauty warms Julie. She glows with surprises and contradictions. She is pure Maud, freewheeling and impulsive, and yet she is firmly disciplined. In just 3 years, Julie has grown from movie bit player to international superstar. In this sequence, filmed in the fields outside Weatherbury, a roaring fire threatens Bathsheba's property.
Make a line! Make a line! Hey, where I put... Keep this line going! All buckets coming up, the empty one's going down. Faster down there! Pass them down quicker! Bucket!
Dorset spreads past the heaths and villages to reach Weymouth at the sea. For Thomas Hardy, who wrote his first novel here, it was a beginning. For John Schlesinger, it will be a turning point, the place for a sequence that sets Bathsheba's life in a fresh direction. A short walk across the street, and Julie is again completely Bathsheba. Completely the strong-willed girl who suddenly knows the hauntedness of love.
Bathsheba's very high-minded, but at the same time terrifically impulsive, short-tempered, fiery, so that she keeps doing things impulsively. She gets herself into a lot of muddles that way. I was terribly happy working at Dorset. I kept seeing everything almost through Thomas Hardy's eyes. And what a gift to just be living in all that beauty.
The mood and drama of Dorset gave abundant life to the books of Thomas Hardy. The same mood and drama are now helping shape a major motion picture, touching the performers, providing an arresting setting, lending a special quality to Hardy's classic story of love, Far from the Madding Crowd.
We're standing in Devizes Marketplace, which took the part of Casterbridge in the movie, right in the centre. This is where they filmed the hiring scene and also the scene where Alan Bates plays the flute. The Madding Crowd had a stellar cast of actors and actresses, some already established like Peter Finch, who was the legendary Hellraiser of British movies. He took the part of Farmer Boldwood. Julie Christie, of course, who was the leading lady, she was already the darling of the British movies, having already worked on a film with the director of this film, John Schlesinger, a movie called Darling, which was the definitive movie that a lot of people say about the swinging 60s in London. The swashbuckling Sergeant Troy, well, that was taken by Terrence Stamp, one of the new wave of young British actors, along with Michael Caine and various others that were setting the trend and setting the pace for the new British film industry, which was evolving at a rate of knots, with the James Bond movies, not least of all. Also, there was Alan Bates, who went on to become a very, very respected West End actor.
How long have you been a shepherd?
A year, sir.
What work are you after?
Bailiff, sir.
I'm wanting a shepherd.
Well, I'm joined here on the Market Cross by a gentleman by the name of Bill Underwood. Bill, thank you for joining me. Bill had an unusual part in the film. He didn't have a speaking part. He had a dancing part.
We heard they wanted some extras for the film, so we came down to the Court Exchange, and my niece was also in it, and she happened to mention to Schlesinger that I did some dancing, and they approached me and asked if I would dance. So I was the third man to come in and did the fast dance. We did so many rehearsals first with Captain Hayes, and he had a drum and a tabor and pipe,
right,
and played for the practice. And when it came to the actual dance, of course, Alan Bates had the flute, and the lady was playing it behind the corner.
Well, you join me now in St John's Church. Well, this is where they filmed a very relatively small scene in the film, but it was a pivotal scene. It was the church that Terrence Stamp, as Sergeant Francis Troy, in full military regalia with his best man, was waiting for his bride-to-be, Fanny Robin, played by Prunella Ransom. Now, he was obviously getting a little bit irate, the reason being that sadly Fanny had mistaken which church they were getting married at and had gone to the wrong church. So she sat in another church whilst there's a band practice going on, not really sort of twigging that she's in the wrong spot, sitting there looking a little uncomfortable. Francis Troy, Terrence Stamp, is getting more and more irate as time wears on. His best man is looking, should we say, embarrassed, to say the least. The various people that are sat in the pews, who would have been local people as extras, again, are looking suitably embarrassed. Sadly, the time slot for the wedding comes and goes, and the wedding didn't take place. At this point, Fanny realises that she's in the wrong church. So she leaves and runs hell for leather to try to get here in the time slot. But sadly, the slot has come and gone. Frank and his best man are now leaving the church, having not gotten married. and Fanny comes running through the gate here from St John's Court. So Fanny then says to him, "Oh Frank, I'm so sorry, I've been to the wrong church," but he is so incandescent he can barely sort of contain himself.
Oh, I made a terrible mistake. Can you believe it? I thought the Garrison Church was All Saints, and then I realised. But it's all right, isn't it, Frank? I mean, it can always be tomorrow, can't it?
You fool for so fooling me.
Oh, Frank, I am sorry, but it can be tomorrow, can't it?
Can it? You made a fool out of me.
Well, when will it be, Frank?
I don't know. I don't know.
I said I was sorry!
This is a relatively small scene within the film, but it's a pivotal scene. Had the wedding gone ahead, then the rest of the interweaving plot lines, quite frankly, wouldn't have made sense. One of the most immediately recognisable buildings within Devizes is the famous Shambles Market Hall. It was built in 1862, it's been used for many different things. It's still a working market to this very day. 6 days a week it plays host to all manner of different types of markets. But it was used in the movie as well. Now, if we didn't tell you about it, you probably wouldn't notice it because it was so cleverly done. This actually was the prison. Down here, in the centre, is where the prison carpenter, I presume, and maybe one of the prisoners, is constructing Farmer Boldwood's coffin, because of course he's having to pay the ultimate for the crime that he committed. And you then get to see Farmer Boldwood being filmed through the prison bars. Well, of course, there's no prison bars. The bars that are actually in the film are the ones in the doorway and to the side. And it looks just like a prison. The magic of the movies.